I've said before that free agency doesn't really exist for big name players anymore. And the names we looked at yesterday, not the sexiest names the Pelicans could get on the free agent market. So let's look at big time trade targets the Pelicans could get to upgrade their roster. Jarrett Allen, Myles Turner, among some others. Let's break it down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we are going to look at some trade targets, big names the Pelicans could try and go get, and a couple of these surprised me when you start to think about them. So I'm excited to talk about a guy like Jarrett Allen, Myles Turner. I've got a 3-team deal in this one for you. And then finally, one simple move that shouldn't be too hard for the Pelicans to pull off. So before we get to all of that, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday. No one else comes to you like this every day, completely free. Breaking down everything you want to know about this team. Trade targets, the collective bargaining agreement, the salary cap, all of the things that impact the Pelicans. We cover it all here, Monday through Friday. If you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. If you are an everydayer, thank you. Let me know on Twitter, at NOLA Jake, or in the comments down below. And if you also want to support the channel, comment down below. This is the number one thing you can do other than listening Monday through Friday. So let's get into some of the names here. Trade targets. You know, the Pelicans don't have much money to spend in free agency. We went over this yesterday. You know, when you're looking at Drew Eubanks, a name I like for the fit for the Pelicans as your big free agent acquisition, you're not doing a whole lot. And all of the other names that we had looked at for a signing trade, say Brook Lopez and others, it just doesn't make sense because the Pelicans aren't in position to just outbid other teams. Yeah, you can get players to come play for you when you spend more than anyone else wants to on them. And you'll see a few teams do that. You'll see Houston get some names and you're going to be like, wait a second, really? They threw money at those guys and it worked. So you aren't in that position to do it. So a guy like Brook Lopez, no. If the money's equal, he's going to stay probably with the Milwaukee Bucks. So you need to start looking at guys that are under contract, guys that aren't free agents that you could go and acquire. And we've got a couple of names here. One very familiar name, but a couple of new names that I want to look at. And I want to start with Jarrett Allen, the center from the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I saw a couple people throw this one out at me. And 2 months ago, I would have been like, nope, not going to happen. You know, he was an all-star this year. He has been great. He averaged 14 points per game, 9.8 rebounds. He was an all-star last year. He was really good last year. 16.1 points per game, 10.8 rebounds. He's also blocking over a shot per game. He's a solid player. He's young. He's on a good contract. This doesn't seem like the type of guy that you really can go out and get. So when people were throwing this out at me, I was like, no, not going to happen. And then I went on the Locked On Cavaliers show because they wanted to ask me about kind of Evan Mobley developing offense and looking at what he can do and what you need to put around him to make him successful. And they surprised me with something. When I look at that Cavaliers team, I look at Donovan Mitchell, there we go, completely blanked, as like the guy on that team that is going to be the go-to scorer and like the best player and all of that. And they were like, no, we think actually Evan Mobley is going to be the man. And they're going to start to eventually kind of put everything through him. And that was eye-opening to me. I hadn't thought about Evan Mobley like that. And look, I don't cover the Cavs, so I'm not going to dive in that deep on them. But okay, if you figure Evan Mobley is in line for that kind of role, you need to start to maximize that kind of role for him and put the right type of players around him to make him successful. They view him as kind of a guy that could develop like Anthony Davis did. Okay. So if you're going to do that, you need shooters around him, and you likely need a center that shoots threes, and that is not Jarrett Allen. Jarrett Allen is going to give you defense. He's going to rebound, and he can defend on the perimeter too. So maybe he's not in their plans. So could you move for him? You know, this is a guy that's on a very reasonable contract, I think. He's making It's flat $20 million the next 3 seasons. He signed a 4-year, $80 million deal. Last season was the first year it went into effect. $20 million, $20 million, $20 million, culminating in the 2025-2026 season. I think that's actually pretty good value for Jarrett Allen. That's about $5 million more this coming season than what Jonas Valanciunas makes. You could easily make a move like this of Valanciunas and like Kyra Lewis Jr. for him. I think works pretty easily. Or Garrett Temple, whatever you want to include it, maybe a first-round pick, and I would probably do a deal like that for a guy locked up under team control. You are getting into the luxury tax in subsequent seasons, but if this is the center that you think works, this is the center that you think works. He's going to give you defense. He's going to give you rebounding. And the best part is with this, and this kind of gets into the philosophy of it, he's a low-usage guy. 16.4% was his usage rate last year. That's low. That's kind of what you want to see from a player like that you're going to put alongside Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, and all of those guys. You don't need them to have a high usage rate to be effective. Jonas Valanciunas, by comparison, 23.4% usage rate. And that's essentially a measurement of the number of possessions a player uses when they're out there on the court. So 16% for Allen, 23% for Valanciunas. There's a big difference there. There's only one ball to go around. He doesn't solve all of the problems. He doesn't solve a spacing issue for New Orleans. But here's where you get into this. I don't think you're going to find one player that fixes exactly what New Orleans needs. A player that shoots threes, spaces the court, and is a good rim protector and can also defend on the perimeter is Brook Lopez. And that's not going to happen. There's like 1 or 2 of those guys in the league right now. So I don't know if it's realistic to try and expect the Pelicans to find one, unicorn player to do exactly what you need them to do. So there's going to be trade-offs with anyone else you look at. Yes, including Myles Turner as well. Yes, including if you keep Jonas Valanciunas, who's a good player. But if you want the defense, the rebounding on a good contract that's under team control, Jarrett Allen fits the bill. We've seen Zion can play and score without court spacers out there. You also have guys like Larry Nance Jr. that you can put in and sub in too. And maybe you still pick up a guy that shoots threes and can run that kind of center out there too to space the court when you just need another big man to do that for the cheap. There's guys like that exist. We'll talk about one of them in the third segment coming up. So I do think Jarrett Allen makes sense if the Cavaliers are like, we need to put better players around Mobley to maximize him a little bit more. I don't think Jonas Valanciunas is perfect for them in that regard. I don't think of him as a court spacer, even though he shoots threes. I don't think you do either. But there is some merit to that. But you can also get into a 3-team deal that I think does open the door to make everybody happy. And let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by eBay Motors. I work on all of my cars. I like my cars running. I hope you like your cars running too, because they don't do you a whole lot of good when they are just sitting there. And if you need your car running, you got to put the right parts in it, the parts that fit. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And you're going to spend more time working on your car, buying more parts too, and spending more money. So go to eBay Motors. It's the one-stop shop you need here. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. This is where I order all of my parts from. New, used, new car, old car. You can get them all over at eBay Motors. And eBay Guaranteed Fit is going to do it. So to get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here, Monday through Friday, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. It's trade season, free agency's coming up. So rest of the week, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at Jordan Hawkins either Wednesday or Thursday. He's got his introductory press conference on Wednesday morning. We will also look at the Utah Jazz and what they're doing with their TV deal, the broadcast future. This is something I've talked a lot about on Locked On Pelicans, with a lot of inside info from the Pelicans and what they've looked at doing and other things. And I want to talk more about that because the Utah Jazz just maybe gave you the future model that you have got to try and use. And I think it could provide a blueprint for what the Pelicans could do. The question is, will they do that? There's a big risk involved with it too. So we'll look at that this week as well, and then get you set for the weekend as free agency starts over said weekend. So let's look at another potential trade target. This is one that's been rumored for years. John Collins just got traded after what feels like 10 years, a decade of trade rumors around him. Another guy that's always had trade rumors around him is the Indiana Pacers center, Myles Turner. Signed an extension this season. He's getting paid very similarly to Jarrett Allen, $21 million next season, then it's $20 million the season after that. A lot of people love him, and I do think the idea of Myles Turner is better than the actual player in Myles Turner. I've talked a lot about rebound rate before. You have Jonas Valanciunas, who actually led the league in defensive rebound rate. When he was on the court, he grabbed a third of all defensive rebounds available. That's a really high number, 33.3%. You have Jarrett Allen, who last season was a 24% defensive rebounding rate guy. And you have Myles Turner, who seems like he's a very good rebounder, but he actually isn't that amazing. He's above average, but I wouldn't call him good. This is a guy last season who grabbed a worse defensive rebound rate than Jarrett Allen did, 22.9. The year before that, 21.3. Then you get 18%, 19% for his career. It's 20.5%. So let's call it 20%. He grabs 1 out of every 5 defensive boards. Jarrett Allen for his career is about a 1 out of every 4 number there. Jonas Valanciunas is about 1 every 3 number. Valanciunas is like consistently in the 30% range. That's significant. Now, Myles Turner, I think, is a better shooter. There's more court spacing there with him, but he's also not the defensive presence a lot of people think he is. He blocks a lot of shots. I will give him that. He's led the league twice in block shots per game. But his block rate isn't, oh no, it's good. It's good. But what I mean is, a lot of it is that he blocks these shots out of bound and the teams retain possessions. There's value in that. It stopped a shot from going in, and if you can rely on your defense to force a turnover, I think that works. But you like your shot blockers to block them to your guys so that they can then go run in transition. He doesn't do a very good job of that. But if you were to put him in on the Pelicans defense, I think he would actually fit in quite well. The rebounding maybe leaves some to be desired, and we saw that be an issue for New Orleans as the season went on. But they were still overall a good rebounding team, just not late in the fourth quarter of close games. And I don't know if he's going to fix that for you. But he can block shots. If he blocks them out of bounds and the teams are just getting the ball back with 14 seconds left or less, well, okay, the Pelicans' defense has been good. They force a lot of turnovers. There's a lot of length there. If you add a shot blocker into that, I think that could work. He doesn't really defend on the perimeter particularly well, and the Pelicans want to switch. Maybe that's going to be a problem. But I also think that this is a guy that would just straight up play. I think they could close games with him. I think they would close games with him. And if you're not, I don't think they need to trade Jonas Valanciunas. The reason we're talking about trades for Jonas Valanciunas is because the coaching staff just won't use him. So if you're not going to use him, get a player they will use. Invest that money either in a guy that'll play or invest that money elsewhere in the roster and go cheap at the center position. That's something you've heard me say a lot. Myles Turner, I think, makes sense. I think this is the time, if they were ever going to do it, would be. And David Griffin, I can tell you, likes Myles Turner as a basketball player. So maybe a deal could get done. You know, again, Valanciunas, a first-round pick, and like Kira Lewis Jr., that's probably enough for the Indiana Pacers, who I don't think view themselves as being hyper-competitive next year, but they should be more competitive than not. He still gets you a center that can help, and I think they might like that sort of thing, along with additional draft capital. I would do that deal. If you don't want Myles Turner, if you want Jarrett Allen, what about this? What about a 3-team trade where just basically every team trades their center? You send Jonas Valanciunas and Kira Lewis Jr. to the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers send Myles Turner to the Cleveland Cavaliers, gives them that shooting around Evan Mobley now, and then the Pelicans get Jarrett Allen. I think you can construct a 3-team deal that way if you prefer Jarrett Allen over Myles Turner. I think I would, but I really am starting to see more of the sense and the appeal in Myles Turner, even if I don't love him as a basketball player. But I think a 3-team deal like that could make sense. I don't know if it's overall prudent for the Pelicans just to invest in the center position and attach other assets to that position again. They've done that before with Derek Favors. Then they moved on from Favors and they traded for Steven Adams, giving up draft capital. Then they exchanged even more draft capital to go from Steven Adams to Jonas Valanciunas. And now you'd be giving up even more draft capital assets to go from Jonas Valanciunas to Myles Turner or to Jarrett Allen. And that is a lot. Is it better just to extend Jonas Valanciunas at $15 million per season? Give him another 2-year, $30 million extension? Maybe. I think there's an argument to be made for that, but we'll see what they end up doing. But let me know. Of the names so far, do you like Jarrett Allen? Do you like Myles Turner? Do you prefer a guy like Clint Capella? I was going to talk about Capella today, but with the news that John Collins is traded, I think he's really entrenched as a starter in Atlanta. I think it was one of those two was going to go. Looks like it was going to be John Collins. Finally, after years of this. But John Collins going to the Utah Jazz, all of a sudden their front court looks very, very, very crowded. So is it time for the Pelicans to look for them to swing a trade for a guy that's going to be cheaper, that you probably wouldn't need to give too much up for, and bring him in and see what a guy like Kelly Olynyk can do for you? And I think that maybe makes a lot of sense for the Pelicans. There's a cheaper option there. I think it gets a little bit more complicated at that point, but I think it's a trade target that is very realistic to acquire. Let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, breaking down everything you want to know about the team. Maybe I'll let you vote on what we talk about tomorrow, more on Jordan Hawkins, or do you want to hear more about the TV deal that the Utah Jazz are doing and how that really applies to the Pelicans and how I view it? I actually went on Gabe Feldman, professor at Tulane. He's arguably the top expert of sports law in the country, teaches here in New Orleans. He's all over the place. He has his sports law podcast, Sports Wise. I went on there and we talked at length about the CBA with that and the broadcast rights, because he finds that pretty interesting and feels it's something that impacts the Pelicans on a big level, and so do I. So we can talk about that tomorrow. I gave you a hint of some of what I was thinking and talking about in there. If you want to go and give that one a listen, and shout out for Gabe Feldman bringing me on. That was really cool to me. So let you pick, and if not, I'll just decide. But those are going to be the next two shows in some order. So what's another trade target for the Pelicans? Again, free agency just doesn't exist. And if you can't go out and get a big name to upgrade the roster, if that's what you're looking to do, get a guy that you're going to play over a guy that isn't going to play, can you do this a little bit cheaper? And I think Kelly Olynyk could be that option for the New Orleans Pelicans. He's making $12.2 million next season on the Utah Jazz. And all of a sudden, the Utah Jazz are kind of loaded in the front court after a trade for John Collins. I was, thinking about putting Larry Markkinen in here, but they're not going to trade him. Or his trade value is going to be like 3 or 4 first-round picks. It's going to be a lot. I don't think that's the direction the Pelicans want to go, even though I really like him as a player and what he has turned into. But Olynyk, yeah, he could be gotten. He's not going to solve a lot of your defensive issues. This is a guy that is, on a rebound rate that is slightly worse than Myles Turner. He doesn't really block a ton of shots either. So he's not going to give you that. What he's going to do is he's going to give you three-point shooting. He shot 39.4% from deep last season. 2 years ago, 39.2%. In between there, we don't have to talk about this, 34%. He's an above average shooter. Career 37% from three on over 3 attempts per game. If you need a court spacer next to Zion Williamson, it could be Kelly Olynyk is your guy. Could you get him for like 2 second-round picks? Probably. Would you need to move Jonas Valanciunas in that? Yeah. You're going to probably then at that point need to include more picks in there because the Utah Jazz are using their cap space up. And so since Valanciunas makes more, you got to kind of pay them to take on that extra $3 million or so. They don't need to send the money back because they have the cap space and they can just absorb him into that. So you got to kind of compensate them for that. And the Pelicans are starting to run low on second-round picks, which have gone up in value, and that's a show by itself in the future that I want to talk about. So you need to find a way to make a deal work. Maybe it's just a protected first-round pick or something along those lines, but I don't know if I love giving that up for a guy of Olynyk's caliber. given that he wouldn't be a big-time starter for you, maybe you could start to look at it and try and acquire someone else there. But again, where do people fit in? And I know the name that you're all thinking of, and that's going to be Jordan Clarkson as that kind of scoring guy off the bench. But I do think the backcourt and, a lot of the rotation spots for the Pelicans are already set. And I don't know if he's picked up his player option or not, $14.26 million, or if he's going to decline that. But he'd get the full mid-level exception, I feel like, from somebody, maybe. Maybe he just opts in since it's a little bit more, knowing he can still get that in a year or so, too. So maybe you can do a bigger trade around those guys, but all of a sudden then you need to include, you'd have to include Kyra in there too, which is fine, and maybe someone else to make the numbers work. And this deal starts to spiral out of control very quickly when all of a sudden you're trading like 5 players from one team and 4 players from another just to make the money work. And that's usually the sign of a trade that isn't going to be a realistic thing. But I think Olynyk could be a name that you go after that you could get relatively cheaply compared to some of these other names that we're talking about, even if you have to include Jonas Valanciunas in there, or maybe that's where a team like Indiana comes in, something along those lines. But I think these are the options they're looking at. They've said they want more rim protection. Olynyk isn't going to give you that, but he gives you shooting. And if you need to go just lean heavily on shooting and kind of say screw defense, you probably can get away with some of that, I think, given how good the defense was for the Pelicans this past season. So I think all of these options are on the table for them. I think these are all long shots at best. I think, look, sign Drew Eubanks in free agency, call it a day, and you're done. But I do think there are other options for the Pelicans depending on what they want to do and how aggressive they want to be in pseudo free agency, which is just the trade market now, since free agency doesn't really quite exist. So let me know. Do you like Jarrett Allen? Do you like Myles Turner, Kelly Olynyk? Capella, is there another name that I'm missing out there that's under contract for a couple more years that you would need to trade for? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to support Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, make sure you become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday and comment down below on YouTube. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow either to talk about the TV deal or more about the newest Pelican, Jordan Hawkins. Oh, wait, I have the outro card.